memang kami gitu seperti itu. Kenapa masih ada?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this first session of the GPC protection series. My name is Marie. I work with the Global Protection Cluster, and I will be facilitating this session. Thanks a lot for joining. The GPC protection series is a public practitioner-driven learning initiative. So this event is the first one in 2026, and we are happy to see many of you online. Thanks a lot for joining. Throughout the year, we are giving space for partners to present guidance, resources, tools that are important for the protection sector. So this series is also meant to remind us of the existing good practices and also bring new approaches and protection issues to the attention of the wider protection network. So moving forward, if any partner is interested to also present tool guidance, research, or emerging protection topics, please feel free to reach out to the Global Protection Cluster, and we'll be happy to discuss the planning of the series for this year. So for today, we are very happy to be joined by our colleagues from the ICRC, Conrad Bark and Maria Carolina de Figueiredo. They will be presenting the revised professional standards for protection work that was launched in 2024. As you know, the professional standards for protection work is a set of common professional ethics designed to make protection work safer and more effective. They establish a baseline to ensure a high level of professionalism, benefiting both affected civilians and the community of protection actors. They are targeting the protection workers and organizations involved in protection work, contributing to better program design and implementation. So this event is a refresher. It's a reminder that those standards exist. It's a public event, and as you know, it's been open to all protection partners. It will be recorded and made available on the GPC website also for partners who were not able to join today. So I will give the floor to our colleagues from the ICRC. Thank you again for joining us. Just to say that there will be first a presentation and then space for questions and answer at the end of the session. So please keep your questions for the end. Feel free to use the chat and also to allow for the presentation to be smooth. Please keep your mic closed for the moment. Thanks a lot again for joining, and Conrad and Maria Carolina, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Marie-Amélie, for the introductions and for inviting us to participate in this webinar. We're very happy to be with all you today. So my name is Conrad Bark. I work with the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva as a methodology advisor in the protection of civilian populations unit. And I'll be co-presenting today's webinar with Maria Carolina. Maybe I'll just let you quickly present yourself.
Sure, thanks, Conrad. Hi, everyone, and very glad to join you as well. My name is Maria Carolina Aissa de Figueiredo. I am the Protection of Civilian Population Advisor here at the ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, working closely with Conrad and I'll be speaking to you in the second half of the presentation a bit about the protection architecture, legal basis, and also some questions around data protection and digital risks. Thanks, and looking forward to the session.
Great. So with that, let's get started. I'll be covering the first half of this presentation. And this is the structure of it. So who is involved in their creation? Who are they meant for? What is its intended audience? The substance of the document, what's in it, and we're especially going to be focusing on what new things are in it, and that will bring us towards the end of the session. Okay, so let's walk through the evolution of the standards to give you a little bit of history and perspective on why they exist. So already in the 90s, in the late 1990s, there was a very significant number of humanitarian and human rights actors that were emerging in the sector, and at the initiative of the International Committee of the Red Cross, a workshop with those actors, so humanitarian and human rights actors, took place, and in the year 2000, the result was the publication of Strengthening Protection in War, a search for professional standards. And so this laid the groundwork for, in 2009, the first edition, and then a second edition followed in 2013, another one in 2018, and last year, the fourth edition came out. So as you can see, there's regular updates to these standards, and that's because the sector, both with regards to humanitarian work and human rights work, does evolve. And so there's a need for consistent revisions to address operational developments, emerging challenges, and evolving practices in protection work. And this ensures that they maintain their relevance and effectiveness. So why do we need these standards in the first place? I think that a coordinated and complementary protection action is really essential when you have so many actors involved in protection work. And so that's the whole raison d'être, the whole reason for the standards to exist, is to create some common basis to work from for all of those different actors. This helps prevent conflicting. This helps prevent, maybe if you can mute your mics, please. Thank you. This will help prevent, conflicting approaches and potentially the causing harm for the people that we are intending to try to help. So the professional standards for protection work, they establish a shared foundation of minimum professional standards so that humanitarian and human rights actors must adhere, and so that they know what to adhere to, and that ensures effective and ethical protection efforts to be made possible. So this was a collaborative process since the inception. So in the late 90s, I mentioned this workshop. And so every time a new edition comes out, it's really done through a collaboration with a wide range of stakeholders. That includes, as you can see from these emblems and logos, a combination of humanitarian and human rights organizations. And so this helps ensure applicability in both those fields. The fourth edition had two new Members joined the advisory group, so that's the Norwegian Refugee Council and the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. In addition to the advisory group, which consists of these 18 core members that you can see here. There is also close consultation, so inputs gathered from local and national non-governmental organizations, from donors, from academia, the private sector, as well as subject matter experts. And this ensures that there's an inclusive and comprehensive consultation for everything that goes into these standards. Okay, so this slide tries to show you a little bit on the process that was undertaken in order to create this 4th edition. So first there was a study of the protection environment. This was done by independent consultants who evaluated the relevance of the existing standards, identified gaps, and recommended improvements for this new edition. Then there was a series of meetings by the advisory group and by thematic working groups and by these local actors, protection leaders and donors, to make sure that everything that's needed to go into these filling these gaps that the consultants identified is done in as comprehensive a fashion as possible. And then the finalization workshop took place in order to build consensus on what goes into the final version. So who are these for? I think the primary audience is really the protection professionals working in armed conflict and other situations of violence. This can consist, as I've already said a few times, of both humanitarian and human rights actors. But there's also an expanding scope of an audience. Sorry, I went too fast. And that's not only donors, but also leaders of humanitarian and human rights organizations, because I think there's a growing recognition that they have a really important role to play in helping to achieve effective protection outcomes. So here's the structure of the new standards. The first chapter is entirely new. It's on protection leadership, introducing a focus on leadership accountability at all levels, including senior managers and donors, to address protection risks. And the following chapters on overarching principles, then chapter 3 on managing strategies. Following that, and this is where Maria Carolina will take over a little bit later on, chapter 4 on the legal basis, chapter 5 on complementarity, chapter 6 on protection architecture, chapter 7 on protection data. Chapter 8 is totally new. It's on digital risks, and it presents emerging standards for addressing digital risks in modern crises, including the ethical use of digital technologies and managing their impact on the rights, safety, and dignity of affected people. And then the final chapter is on professional capacities. So now let's delve into the key elements, focusing on the chapters that were substantially revised or newly added. So starting with protection leadership, this chapter addresses 3 areas: organizational leadership, individual leadership, and the role of donors and states. So organizational leadership includes fostering a culture that prioritizes protection and ensures strategic alignment between headquarters and country contexts, and maintains a coherence at different levels. In other words, between headquarters, country offices, and sub-offices in external positioning. So organizations should also coordinate and complement each other's efforts in order to maximize impact. Then you have individual leadership, where leaders such as heads of delegations or heads of mission or country directors have a responsibility to amplify the voices of affected people, promote adherence to legal frameworks, and ensure equitable partnerships with local organizations. Especially with regards to risk sharing, local organizations should not be left with that outsourced risk in contexts where international organizations have limited access or acceptance, but rather that risk should be shared by both the local and the international partner. They should also have and promote a common understanding of what it means to work on protection. This is especially important in multidisciplinary teams. Each team member with varying specialities should understand how they can contribute towards achieving protection outcomes. So support from the leadership in this effort is crucial, as it will help ensure that everyone is working together in the same direction and everyone knows why. Ethical challenges, which in this field of work often arise, should be dealt with and addressed, again, by all of the team members in a collaborative manner that reinforces the team to ensure that the best protection action can be made despite the difficulties. Individual leaders must also document decisions and maintain predictability in their actions to build and foster effective protection efforts. So this predictability should be in line with the mandate or mission of the organization, and it helps for external audiences in particular to understand from the outset why the organization is present and acting in the manner that it does. And documenting decisions is key for operational continuity and the rationale for decisions to be understood by all relevant internal colleagues. Then we have the final column on the right, which is the leadership responsibilities of donors and states. And they are expected to provide political and financial support for protection priorities and promote respect for humanitarian principles. This is linked to the ICRC's interpretation of Common Article 1 in the Geneva Conventions, which is to respect and ensure respect for international humanitarian law during armed conflicts. Donors and states should also use their influence to create environments that prevent violations and abuses. In other words, they should not just spring into action when harm has already occurred in a reactive way, but when there are indications that it may occur in the short or mid-term future, preventive actions should already be put in place. They should also ensure that risks are shared equitably, particularly when there's partnerships involving local actors. This is in relation to the point I already made on individual leadership. The donors' involvement in this process should help reduce the pressure on local actors. And lastly, donors should fund protection work, as without them, it's difficult to place protection action at the center. And this is especially important nowadays when funding mechanisms are under so much strain. So the next chapter in the professional standards looks at overarching principles. We will just go over this section briefly because not too much has changed, but the chapter really highlights the importance of integrating the principles of humanity and impartiality. Impartiality includes non-discrimination into protection work. The principles of neutrality and independence are less emphasized for some actors. So the chapter really underscores the need for all actors to avoid undermining the efforts of those who adhere to them. Then this chapter also discusses the importance of the do no harm principle to avoid exacerbating risks or creating new ones through the actions of professional protection workers. So this includes conducting thorough risk analyses, involving affected communities in planning and promoting awareness of protection risks among individuals. And finally, people-centric programming. So this is really about protection efforts, having always to try to ensure meaningful participation of affected people in all stages of protection activities. This includes engaging with them in order to understand their needs, learning from their experiences, strengthening their resilience, and providing affected people with the information and tools necessary to mitigate risks. Chapter 3 is on managing protection strategies. It was led by Interaction. We do a lot of work on results-based management, and it was significantly updated in this chapter. The chapter has 3 focuses. The first is on protection analysis and risk identification. So it really encourages context-specific analysis of protection risks based on experiences and input of affected people. This includes identifying threats, which most often emanate from duty bearers, and the vulnerabilities and capacities of affected people to mitigate or recover from those threats. The analysis should involve meaningful engagement with affected people, ensuring their participation in identifying risks and drivers of harm. A multidisciplinary and dynamic approach is essential, incorporating diverse perspectives, regularly updating the analysis, and adapting to evolving context to prioritize critical protection risks effectively. So it's an ongoing process to make sure that it's relevant, continues to be relevant. The next section in this chapter is on planning and implementation. Protection strategies must address the main drivers of protection risks, so threats, vulnerabilities, and capacities, through a coordinated and complementary approach. Strategies should thus be developed collaboratively whenever possible with affected communities to build a clear causal logic, or also known as a theory of change, that identifies the current situation, desired outcomes, and the steps needed to achieve them. This approach integrates responsive actions to prevent immediate harm, remedial actions to restore dignity and living conditions, and environment building actions to create conditions for the full respect of rights of the concerned population. And then finally, the monitoring and evaluation section, which looks at how protection strategies must include regular monitoring and evaluation and be adapted whenever necessary to ensure effectiveness and accountability. So monitoring should track changes in protection risks using both qualitative and quantitative indicators, including proxy indicators like community perceptions of safety. Evaluations should measure the contributions of various actions and actors to protection outcomes, focusing on long-term impact and lessons learned. Regular reflections and learning involving affected people help refine strategies and encourage informed risk-taking, while maintaining accountability to both donors and affected people. And with that, I will hand over to Maria Carolina. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Conrad. And feel free to just put everything on the slide. I'll talk through it as I go. So as Conrad mentioned, there are, I believe, 2 chapters that are new in this edition. So a lot of what I'll be presenting is already known, but I think it's always a good refresher to have and to be able to sort of reaffirm our standards as kind of a global sector and also as global protection actors. So when you take a look through chapter 4, of course, the focus is on building on the legal base of protection. And I think more than ever, especially in the last 2 years since the updates to the standards were published, it's extremely important that as protection actors, we understand the relevant frameworks that apply in the context where we're working. So, of course, if we're talking about contexts of armed conflict, then we're talking about international humanitarian law, or IHL. There is also international human rights law, which applies, refugee law, and I think very importantly, domestic legislation. We cannot forget that in the context where we work, each have their own respective domestic legislation. Sometimes international law and domestic legislation are very integrated. They speak to each other really well. Sometimes there might be certain gaps or certain challenges. But for us as global protection actors, it's very important that we understand both the protections that legal frameworks provide for the people who we're supporting, as well as potentially some of the areas that we need to be more attuned to. The second point that is really underscored in this chapter is, all right, once we know the legal frameworks, what should we be doing with them? I think it's very important that in this day and age, we're consistent and coherent when we're talking about the law as protection actors. So referring to the right legal frameworks at the right time in the right place, and that we really understand how to navigate these different pieces of legislation. So meaning that if you have support within your respective organizations, let's say a legal advisor or even a legal reference organization in the context where you work, that you can reach out to, or in the case, for example, of international humanitarian law, the ICRC, to better understand, that you're seeking out that advice, that counsel, those publications that are publicly available, because as global protection actors, we really need to make sure that we're consistent when we're referring to certain protections under certain pieces of law, and that we're not each contradicting each other. I think especially in this day and age where, social media plays a big role in terms of how we communicate with affected populations, even with authorities, that consistency and coherence is really key. And then, as I mentioned before, it is possible in some cases that there will be certain gaps between, let's say, international law and its integration into national legislation. For us as protection actors, and this is one thing that's really stressed in the chapter, we should not be compromising on international legal standards. And actually, we can play a very important role in encouraging authorities to ensure that their domestic laws are compatible with some of those positive legal standards that exist in international law. Just to flag here, the ICRC has, and I'll try to drop it in the chat later on, a very important tool, for example, on the issue of sexual violence, which is called the Domestic Compatibility Checklist. And that's precisely what we tried to do on this issue, is illustrate to states what international law says in terms of obligations to prevent and respond to sexual violence, some examples of good practice from different regions and countries around the world, and guidance on how they can adapt those and integrate them into their national legislation. So those types of tools do exist. And we do really encourage other protection actors to rely on them when promoting better complementarity. So actually on the topic of promoting complementarity, not so much legally, but let's say operationally in terms of our actions as global protection actors. Conrad, if maybe you can just pull up the 3 points. Okay. So there are 3 points that I want to emphasize here for chapter 5, and I think none of them will come as a surprise. So the first is obviously the importance of coordination, and especially when it comes to not only our action, but also our analyses. So let's say our assessments, how we look at different types of protection risks, what types of tools we're using to do that. And there are 2 purposes. So one, of course, is avoiding duplication, and I think that's directly linked to another point that I'll get to, which is the harmful impact of duplication on affected people. And the second is really about ensuring maximum impact. We know that with dwindling resources today, not every protection actor will be able to have a complete and detailed analysis of every single protection issue in every geographic location across an entire context or country. So there, it's very important through the existing coordination mechanisms that we have, that within the limits of the confidentiality and the procedures of each of our own organizations, we are sharing our understanding of the situation, our analyses, to make sure that then the responses we're developing are complementary. I think within that, it's really important to say as well that sometimes we might face specific limitations because of the restrictions or the confines of our mandates. It could be about safety, security, access, maybe our specific dialogue with decision makers on a particular protection issue. And there, the idea is that we should not be going it alone. As global protection actors, we do have the capacity to mobilize each other. Conrad mentioned before, donors, other stakeholders, to be able to kind of address specific barriers where we might see them in our work. And I would like to flag as well, there's a very important component, which I believe was updated in this edition, in Chapter 5 on safe and quality referrals. Again, I would emphasize that now more than ever, given the severe restrictions that we face on resources, and we know that in so many places, many actors providing direct services for those with protection concerns have had to reduce, scale down, or even completely discontinue their activities. So it's very critical that we're clear on, first of all, the limitations of what each of us can provide, and then who we should be contacting and how, if let's say someone who we're providing support to requires additional services that go beyond the purview of what we are able to provide within our own organizations. And that means not only giving some information, but really having made sure that the services we've mapped are of a certain quality, that they're safe, that they're easily accessible, and that they really correspond to the services that the person we are engaging with or groups are searching for. So I would highly, highly recommend this section on referrals in particular. Next slide. All right. So the next section, Chapter 6, focuses on the protection architecture. And although we know that our protection architecture has experienced some changes in the last 2 years, I think the principles that are underscored in this chapter still very much apply. And again, as Conrad mentioned at the beginning, the standards are meant to be precisely that, standards. So it's not detailed operational guidance for how to do things step by step across every context, but it's really the standards we should be aiming for. So within that same vein, in Chapter 6, you'll find an outline of how protection actors should be engaging with primary duty bearers. And really the emphasis there is being clear on our respective missions, mandates, ways of working, and also what we expect from those who are really in the end of the day to be kind of upholding their legal obligations to be able to provide protection to affected people. Just as a very concrete example, if you are an organization that has a really, really specific focus on one particular topic, it's important that that's communicated, that it's known by the different authorities and duty bearers who you're engaging with. And if that changes, to also keep them in the loop. Because, for example, if I work in an organization today that only provides, let's say, technical water and sanitation services, and all of a sudden we start doing protection work, but we don't communicate that clearly to the authorities, it can create certain challenges and barriers and maybe even put people at risk. So just clarity and transparency and consistency being very important in how we engage with primary duty bearers. In terms of the second aspect of focus in Chapter 6, so we also look at recommended approaches for engaging not just with UN peacekeeping operations, but also international police and military forces, which we see increasingly today. So looking at what types of integration arrangements could be most appropriate, and also the different possibilities and opportunities that exist for advocacy and also mobilization of some of these actors. And I think it's important to flag here as well that in Chapter 6, there is a new section on working with communities, including civil society organizations, who were much more closely consulted in this edition of the standards, to really emphasize the point that community-based organizations, civil society organizations, and communities by and large are part of our protection architecture. So that means that we as global protection actors do and must play a role in supporting them when appropriate, and of course within the limitations of our mandates, in their respective development of self-protection mechanisms. In some cases, it could even be in their own dialogues with duty bearers, and really making sure that they are, when appropriate, enabled to be first responders in a crisis, and that they can and should play a role in their own protection when that does not cause additional harm or risks. Next slide. So here I won't go into too much detail because my colleague Joël Dzik, who is on the call, I believe, will have a separate session at a later date, particularly on Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. But just to flag very quickly, there have been some updates to Chapter 7, I believe, on managing protection data. And this is quite a technical chapter, but the aim is really to provide a comprehensive overview of the key considerations for managing data and information related to protection outcomes. So here you'll find some specific elements on data risk assessment, security, retention, especially data sharing and transfer, which I think is very important for many of our organizations. And it can potentially answer some questions around how to manage specific data-related risks, because in the annex, you'll find some subtopics. So for example, how to look at data-related risks when it comes to AI, digital ID, and other tools. Just to flag here that this chapter was developed in close collaboration with the Data Protection Office and data protection experts from other organizations outside of the ICRC. So really the idea is to reflect what at the time in 2023 and 2024 were kind of the most current and state-of-the-art practices, which of course, as we know for data, are continuously evolving, but I think it gives us a really good baseline to continue working off of. And then in terms of the second, let's say, sort of digital element, so there is a chapter, Chapter 8, on a protection approach to digital risks. This newest chapter spotlights the specific protection risks that digital technologies or new technologies might pose to affected people. And it also provides a bit of an overview of the emerging standards on how, as global protection actors, we can reduce some of these risks. I think here it's really important to mention that what happens in the digital, those are protection risks. So just because they're happening in a digital way doesn't mean that, you know, we say, okay, this is different or this is about data protection. Actually, it really is about core protection work. And if you can, Conrad, just to the next slide, to maybe go into what that really means today in terms of some key trends that the ICRC and others who were consulted on the standards have observed, and I think continue to be very valid. What we see is increasingly a digitalization of armed conflict and violence. So that means that digital technologies or new technologies are increasingly being used in warfare and other types of, let's say, security operations. And while they can serve legitimate purposes, there is also always a risk that they can enable some type of harm that then impacts affected populations. And so in this chapter, you'll find some examples of what that could potentially look like. And the reason that obviously there is this risk is because we know today that affected populations all over the world are increasingly connected. So we see in many contexts, even those that comparatively have lower internet connectivity, people are still using digital tools to be able to gather information on how they can protect themselves, to stay connected with their loved ones, with their communities. But when using these technologies, and especially when digital literacy might be low, it can expose civilians to certain types of harm. So for example, digital surveillance, or somehow bringing them into closer proximity with actors involved in conflict. So that is, of course, a concern, and I think something that all of us have to be aware of, this digital divide, where unequal access to technology and connectivity can also exacerbate existing protection risks, vulnerabilities, and putting some specific segments of the population even more at risk. And then the last point on that is also in terms of how we as global protection actors are evolving when it comes to digitalization. So protection actors, and this we saw when we were consulting for the standards, across humanitarian and human rights organizations, among others, are increasingly relying on new technologies to support our work. And of course, that can be very positive. So in some cases, it can mean that we're able to communicate with affected people more seamlessly. We can map affected areas more quickly. We have databases that speak to each other and enable us to do better quality case management. And of course, the point is then we can increase the reach and the efficiency of our protection activities. But I think it's really important to underscore that technology is not neutral. So to keep in mind that with every new technology we use, there is always some type of risk. Again, as I mentioned before, it can exacerbate some vulnerabilities or even become vectors of harm. So let's say, for example, we are using a chatbot, and I think this has been examined quite a bit by UNICEF in some of their research, to provide certain types of psychosocial support or referrals, guidance to victims and survivors of sexual violence. But depending on how that chatbot is designed and the algorithm that it depends on, it could either provide, answers that are not appropriate or unhelpful, or even sometimes exclude certain populations. The services can fail, they can be disrupted. So these are things that we do need to try and take into consideration. And the way that we can do that, as you will see in the chapter, there are some concrete recommendations, and my colleague Joël will go more into detail about this in a separate session. But when it comes to raising awareness and also maintaining that same principled protection approach. So even when a technology may have many, many benefits, it's still very important for us to keep the do no harm principle at the forefront of our minds and think about how we can minimize the risks that maybe new technologies can pose. Next slide. So here we'll share the presentation with you afterwards. I won't go into too much detail now, just in the interest of time, but you can see some very concrete examples of, let's say, potentially the traditional protection risks that we always think of and how they can be amplified or exacerbated through new technologies or other types of digital risks. And I think it really helps us to kind of reframe the conversation and bring the digital into our global conversations about protection. Next slide. So the last chapter is on enhancing professional capacities, obviously in protection. And I think it's kind of a perfect circle in the sense that when Conrad opened with the chapter on protection leadership, I think these are kind of, two sides of the same coin. So when we speak about enhancing professional capacities, it's really about creating an environment that fosters learning the fundamental skills that are required for protection, the experience and the competencies, because what we have said since the standards were published and even throughout the consultations, I think this was really common consensus, that the standards are only as effective as the people implementing them. So in order for us to uphold the standards, we need trained, qualified protection professionals. And so that's something, for example, that in this session, we're trying to accomplish. In other types of seminars, webinars, we always try to promote, and really an area that I think as global protection actors needs to be at the forefront. There are two other points that are raised in this chapter, which I think are really important, and that's not just about kind of people, but it's more about the environment itself. So first of all, security management and protection work. I think sometimes we tend to see these in silo or as separate, but one of the things that came out during the consultations and the discussions is that really these are deeply interconnected. We know for a fact that protection activities are more sensitive than oftentimes other types of humanitarian efforts. So it's really important that we're aware of, we identify and we address preemptively the specific risks that could be associated with this type of work, so that indeed our colleagues, our teammates who are carrying out this protection work are safe, and they have actually the space to be able to do so in a way that doesn't put them at risk, or the affected people with whom they're supporting and working. And the second point on that, going back kind of to this principle of do no harm, ethical standards, accountability, is really related to ethical conduct. So every organization must have a code of conduct. I think this is something that's quite clear today, or some type of equivalent framework to ensure accountability accountability and uphold ethical standards. And that's to make sure that our activities are professional, not only in terms of the technical aspect, but also our conduct. Because at the end of the day, we want to be really strong ethical representatives of protection. So I think I will leave it there. That's the last chapter, but maybe just a quick note in terms of the outputs and where you can find more information. Of course, the professional standards have been published. They're available in a single PDF. They're also in a paper version, if you so wish. If I'm not mistaken, and Conrad, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the PDF is available in several languages. And then the e-learning course, so it's a short, I believe, 1 hour, much more digestible course online that anyone who would like to do some e-learning on their own time can access. Unfortunately, this one is only available in English for the time being on the Disaster Ready platform, but if there is an interest, request, need for translation, we can always try to look at that in the future. And then, as I mentioned before, I believe there will be a separate session when it comes to protection approach to digital risks in the future. And of course, it goes without saying, if ever there are specific questions, particularly for the ICRC, Conrad and I are always available to answer. So thank you very much for your attention. And maybe I will hand over to you, Conrad or Marie, if you have anything to add. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Maria Carolina. I also thank everyone for their attention. We're happy to answer any questions that may have come up in your minds whilst listening to us. Any comments, please feel free to jump in directly. I see one hand coming from Saint-Florian. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Maria, for your clear and concise explanations. I have one question with 2 small questions inside. I'm Symphorian from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And here, as we are in field, we have many standards, as you might know, but when you presented to us, I could not see sphere, core humanitarian standard, and so on. So in the field, we have different standards, so it becomes very difficult to implement. So the first and main question is, why could you not work with other standards like core humanitarian standards, even a sphere? Because a couple of years ago, we were really delighted to see that a sphere incorporated core humanitarian standard in their book. This is the first question. And the second one, especially when Maria, you talked on the chapter 9 about training, is it any credential training? Because we know that this is really technical. There are some legal aspects, and there is also soft law. So is there any structured formal training? And last question is, do you have a separate website, or if we need only to have information, we'll find only all related information under ICRC website? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Safarian. I'll try to answer the first of your questions about the multiplicity of standards and why there should not be less of them so that it's easier for field practitioners, which is a very good question. I think that what you hopefully see in the sphere and core standards that you referenced, there is a coherence with what's in the professional standards of protection work, and that they should complement each other rather than confuse. I think ultimately that's what should be the case, and I think, as I was mentioning in the slide in the first in the beginning of the presentation, I think these professional standards were created first through this workshop in the late 90s because there was none at all, and it was really to promote this document, which has to be revised from time to time, as the reference for protection work. Now, if there's others who develop other standards, it ideally should be in reference to this one. That's my answer to that one. And Maria Carolina, I'll hand the floor to you for the other on training and the website.
Yeah, thanks, Conrad. So you'll see here, thank you, first of all, for the excellent questions. You'll see here that I've shared the link to the e-version of the professional standards for protection work. So that's where you can find it on the ICRC website. And of course, learning resources, and if there were ever to be any updates, you would find it here. You can also find the recording of the official launch event. In terms of other trainings, so the ICRC does have some publicly available trainings, including on IHL. So I'll drop the link to those trainings here, including, I think, on the platforms Kaya and Disaster Ready. And that's something that really we encourage colleagues across all organizations to be able to access. I think when it comes to the law in particular in IHL, many of our resources are publicly available. And on the question of more specific trainings, I think that's something that, of course, is usually led by the Global Protection Cluster and others when there's a question of, let's say, a specific subsection where there's a need to let's say, refine training on a specific aspect. I don't know, Maria-Amélie, if there's something further that you would like to share on that in terms of the offerings when it comes to trainings.
Thanks. No, just to say that also on the GPC website, you have a learning page with some training opportunities. And then please, I mean, we don't have everything on the website, so don't hesitate to also reach out to the GPC for additional support in terms of training on protection.
Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Shirin, I think I see your hand next. Please go ahead and ask. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria, and Conrad. This is Shirin Zadra from the WFP Afghanistan, and working as a protection gender and AV focal point. My question is about the protection. When we talk about the protection standards in our programming, the question is, it's just about our beneficiaries, or it's broader than this the beneficiary? Because as you may be aware that in my country, no humanitarian worker, specifically women who are working in the humanitarian and the areas of protection and some critical issues like PE or GBV, they are themselves, they are under hazard situations. Even they hide their entity as a humanitarian worker. As a global protection cluster, how we can mitigate this risks, specifically for who are under limitations in the country like Afghanistan, and what's the approach? This is the only question that every time, it's not answering. And just I want to you that please say how we can mitigate, like, or work under this. And if as a humanitarian worker, specifically in the protection and the GB or PSC even if we are under the hazard situation, how we can help others, specifically our beneficiaries. And these are my concerns, and want to hear from you. And it's good to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shirin. I'll start and I'll let Maria Carolina complement after. I think so. I didn't hear everything exactly because of the network, but my understanding of the question is that, you know, in light of risks facing protection staff in Afghanistan, how to mitigate the risks facing those staff in order to best help those we intend and beneficiaries. Is coming from the leadership chapter of the professional standards, where there's quite a lot of emphasis on doing a thorough risk analysis and ensuring that through that risk analysis, it's decided who can do what type of protection work in order to expose people at risk, protection staff included, to the least extent possible. And so such a risk analysis should help that mitigation process that you described, Shirin. And I think it's really important to do that at the leadership level so that roles and responsibilities are clear, and to review whether the right approach has been adopted regularly. And Maria, go ahead.
Yeah, Shirin, thank you very much for your question, which, to be very honest, is a complex one. I don't think there's an easy answer to. And here also I would stress that the standards in and of themselves are not going to provide necessarily all of the answers for the how in the way that guidelines would, but more in terms of the principles. And I think maybe just to add what Conrad had just mentioned, in the chapter on complementarity, if you go into a bit more detail, the reason that I think we decided to add this update when it comes to involving communities, or what the role of communities are, is precisely because we know in so many contexts, a lot of our frontline staff are from the own communities that they're serving. They themselves are exposed to often many of the same protection risks. And so that's why it is very important that as global protection actors, when there is more than one of us working in a context and we're working together, we're carefully balancing those risks and trying to assess, as Conrad had mentioned, where it's most appropriate and also safest for frontline staff, for example, to engage, particularly when they're members of communities that are already at high risk. What does that mean? What types of activities does that include? I think going through that point-by-point analysis is really important. It's not to say that the solutions are easy, because we do know that in many contexts there are local actors that might be very well working alone. And so one way or another, they're doing their best to try and serve and help the communities that they're from without many alternate options. But I think, again, that's also why we do have spaces like the Global Protection Cluster and global protection actors that we can exchange with, that we can discuss with, to see maybe even if remotely there are ways that we can complement each other and also provide guidance or support to offset some of these challenges.
Great, I hope that answers sufficiently, Shirin. I see question, Ole, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, colleague. My name is Alexei. I'm from Ukraine, a case management advisor from Postmishka UA. And sorry, I have bad internet connection, and maybe I missed something. But you mentioned AI in context of risk to data protection and risk from beneficiary. And I want to ask, do these standards include recommendation for ethical and safe use of AI. And if you need some support in translation this standard into Ukrainian, I will be happy to assist you with this task. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexei, for that question. Because I am not a technical expert, I'm going to see if my colleague Joelle is still on the line and defer to her expertise on this one. Joelle, in case you're still connected, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to add specifically about recommendations in terms of engaging with AI and data protection.
Thanks, Maria Carolina. So when it comes to AI, we are all, as protection actors, we're all developing independent institutional AI policies. At the time of the writing of this chapter, we had not yet published, for example, the ICRC AI policy. UNHCR, for example, had not yet published their AI policies, so there is no reference to these policies in there. So for any specific current ongoing projects in which you want to take measures to align with existing policies that basically are published after the date of the this version of the professional standards. However, you'll see at least in chapter 8 and a little bit in chapter 7 some of the considerations that will apply. They're not going to give you a quick answer. They're not going to be fit for your specific use case, of course, because they're not designed for that. However, in any the broad answer would be that in any activity where you are deploying a new tool that is AI or otherwise any digital tool that is towards people affected by violence or conflict or other humanitarian settings, to do first of all the data protection assessments. So what are the data retention protocols? What are the data protection protocols that you will put in place? In addition to that, what we are calling in this document a digital risk assessment, but for some of you that might actually mean a human rights impact assessment. So depending on your scope and depending on the type of tool that you're using. To give an example, one of the things that we say in chapter 8 is not testing and piloting new tools directly on people, for example. So let's say you are developing one of the tools that is very fast moving right now is chatbots, right? So not to directly test a chatbot without taking necessary measures to conduct human rights impact assessment in addition to data protection impact assessments, because this is a responsibility not only from a point of view of ethical considerations, but also protection considerations. I know this means that we are not catching up maybe on the latest tools available today, but that is for a reason. And the reason is that we cannot delegate that responsibility to tools that have not yet been proven to be safe and do not cause unnecessary harm to people. I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you.
Very quickly, and we answer what we can.
So maybe since there's 3 questions coming up from 3 different colleagues, maybe I'll let Farida please ask your question. After that, Hafez.
Ayman and Hafez.
I'm sorry, Ayman, and then after that, Hafez, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I think I have a problem in my sound. يا غمدان الصوت حقي ما بيشتغلش.
So maybe if we can, Hafez, if you have some challenges with your microphone, maybe Farida, if you can just ask your question, and we'll take Ayman's and we'll move on.
Okay, do you hear me there?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm very grateful to joining this GPC. I am Ayman from Sudan, the Jazeera State, Hub Organization Field Coordinators. This is
Hello.
exactly what we're looking for. We're asking to be updated because the context is going to be different from places to places. We're facing some issues, especially with the local authority. I hope even we can take this as a point. They have really hesitation with the protection. They think that will change the behaviors of as people, and so that what I recommended that should be to be the research capacity building as you have done for us right now. And then for the events, the problem which is the facings, the protections clusters is going to be there is no really is going to be regulars meeting in order for the referral. The referral is going to be what is exactly is going to be the service provided. It should be there is going to be some channels is going to be easiest for the for the for the who's going to be to provide services exactly. My question is there is going to be any update according to any state? I mean, the context and the behaviors of the people is going to be difficult for the change behaviors, and what exactly the protection is going to be provided for them, and so on. So I hope so is going to be in the to set the plan for the future. And this is this is remarkable here in Sudan. And thank you very much.
Okay, I don't know if Hafiz or Farida, you want to ask your question as well? If so, I see Farida's hand.
Hello,
Please go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
You hear me?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Go
Thank
ahead,
you so
ask
much.
it.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, thank you.
I had a problem issue. I'm just, I am Hafid Darhani. I'm the unit head of social protection unit at SFD. I'm just here to enhance the importance of the social registries, national social registry, and like Yemeni context, also in a conflict context. It's very important because we faced a lot of issues because there are many partnership and partners in social protection activities across Yemen, and there is many duplicates, and sometimes it's difficult to track the impact of the interventions because they use multi-identification documents to identification of beneficiaries. And we hope to build this social registry gradually during implementing activity in social protection. And also this will be cost efficient in the future and make our work it's more coordination and work together with all partners as if they start to apply the national ID in their activities and their projects. So if there is any best practices in the same context, especially in conflict areas, maybe it will be benefit for us to share in the next meetings for this cluster. Over, and thank you all of you for this informative presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Hafiz. And maybe just quickly, Farida, in case you still have a question.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here. And thank you, Global Cluster, for this workshop and for this chance. I'm Farida from Sudan, GBB officer in HOPE organization. My question is, you said that I want to know some examples of legal frameworks that could be useful using in our conflict areas, as Sudan and other conflict areas. I ask it because right now in Sudan, the situation is very difficult, and we need to mitigate the risk that faced by staff in humanitarian sector. So I'm glad to hear from you. Thank you for this chance.
Okay, thanks very much, Farid, Ayman, Hafiz, for your questions. We'll try to recap, I think, as quickly as we can. So starting first with Ayman's question, if I remember correctly, it was also about the frequency of updating and whether there will be kind of follow-up updates to the standards. In brief, yes. Most likely. It's happened so far that updates to the standards have usually been every 5 years, but that's not been on purpose because we want to maintain a 5-year cycle. It's just been that usually at those moments, as global protection actors, we've realized that there have been major developments that require further clarification, and hence there's a need to update. So maybe Marie-Amélie will have some more information on that. But for the time being, in theory, yes, it would be planned for the future when there are necessary updates that have to be added to the standards. In terms of Farida's question, so again, the standards are really meant to be global in nature, so not diving into specific contexts. But of course, if we speak about Sudan, that's a context where multiple different bodies of law apply. So that's international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and then of course domestic law. I'm not entirely sure what maybe some of the challenges you're facing could be, but also in this case, I would encourage your organization, if there are specific questions about IHL specifically and the laws of war, then definitely to approach the ICRC's delegation in Sudan, and perhaps see, how those questions can be clarified better on the ground. Thanks.
Maybe just to react also to Hafiz's points, I mean, I can only agree on the importance of complementarity of what all various partners are trying to do in your context. And I think that, through the National Protection Cluster, trying to use these global kind of standards as a compass of sorts to help guide how to work in complementarity would be an excellent way forward. Don't know if there's any other questions from any hands. Do you see any?
Saleh.
And Halima. Yes, Saleh, and please go ahead, and then Halima.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for this so excellent information you've provided us with. My so short or brief question is, as we are working in protection, do you hear my voice?
Yes.
As we are working in Sudan, and sometimes we work in conflict-affected zones or areas, data information management or data management, sometimes less management, or when we use information without encoding or data without encoding, like survivors information or writing reports, sometimes puts the actors or protection actors, put them at risk through authorities' questions or even the perpetrators' questions. So you may have like a GBV case or someone endangered to or exposed to rape, and then write the information, and after time people come and find the information with you or have your laptop or your mobile and find those information. So they may put you or put the protection actors in risk or at risk. I think you've got my point. If maybe I didn't get chance or I am not able to send the message clearly, but maybe you've got what I mean exactly. So this is Saleh Abdul Karim from Sudan. Hope Organization Field Coordinator, West of 4. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saleh. And maybe we get Halima, please share your question with us as well, and then we'll.
Hello, everyone. I hope all you are doing well. I'm from Hurduf, Somalia. My name is Halima Shakunis. I'm the project officer. My question is based on the chapter 8. How can humanitarian actors protect communities how can humanitarian actors protect communities from civilians that may put them at risk of arrest or harm? Yeah, that is the question I wanted to ask. I hope you can hear me.
So maybe just quickly for Saleh's question on data protection and especially sensitive data, and sorry to put you on the spot again, Joël, but I think here really it is an important question because it gets at why we collect data, for what purpose, how we store it. Again, Saleh, if you go to chapter 7 of the standards, you'll see in much more detail the different elements that need to be taken into consideration when doing that risk assessment, because that should be done long before collecting people's data. I think it's really important that, you know, as protection actors, we're clear on why we're collecting data and that we're only collecting as much as we actually require to be able to provide an adequate response to affected people who require protection services. So I would say as a first step, but then Joël, I don't know from a technical perspective, there's also any other considerations that you'd like to flag.
You'll find them in chapter 7, the principles around minimization, but also retention. So having clear timelines of how long that data is retained and what for, but also where you store that data and protocols in place, of course, for data sharing and the adequate assessment that need to be done before sharing. So in chapter 7 lays out all of these concerns. So maybe it would be easier if in the chat we can also share the link of the e-learning of chapter 7, and that helps to go through all of them.
Great, thank you so much.
And for Halima's question, I think the best way I can try to answer that, Halima, is referring you to the chapter on managing protection strategies, and in particularly looking at the sections, the first part of it, which looks at protection analysis. So you described the situation, if I understood correctly, where certain members of the general population are posing are the threat. So they're not necessarily the traditional kind of duty bearer, and they're posing it on specific other individuals from the general population. So I think there, what would really be important would be to do a thorough analysis on that specific situation, by looking at the threat and its nature, looking at the vulnerabilities and capacities of the persons affected, and then ideally consulting with those people affected to see what they've already tried to do, and trying to explore whether there's any potential action that your organization can do. But it's very context specific. So I wouldn't be able to guide. I don't think the standards can provide any specific answer to whether or not it could work, but I think the analytical tool can be useful to help you and your organization determine that. Yeah.
Thank you.
That answers. Do we have any more questions?
And then I think we have time for one last question. I see that Mohammed has his hand up. So Mohammed, feel free to go ahead and ask your question. And then I think we'll just wrap up the session today with some last points and reminders also from our hosts. Mohammed, for some reason we can't hear you. Mohammed, we're very sorry, but unfortunately the sound is not working. So maybe if you can type your question, we'll try our best to read it in the meantime, and then get back to you when we can.
Maybe just from my side, I don't know, Conrad and Maria Carolina, if there's anything else you would like to say in terms of like final messages. Otherwise, I'm also happy to close slowly the session.
Well, just a big thanks for everyone's questions, and wish you all the very best. And hope to see you again soon.
Thanks a lot. And yeah, thanks to all the participants for the questions and for staying on the line and listening to the presentation. I think we could hear from your interventions also, you know, that you are joining from very different contexts. For the questions that were very context specific, please also don't hesitate to reach out to the protection cluster at the country level, because the protection cluster can also help maybe navigate some of those issues. And maybe on our side from the GPC, a huge thank you to you, Conrad and Maria Carolina. I think thanks for accepting to be the first of this series of webinar. I think for us it was really important to start with a reminder on those standards, because they are of course the foundation of our work. You've touched on a reminder of all the core concepts, protection principles, legal frameworks. So I think it's a very nice way for the protection community to start the year also. Thanks also for mentioning everything that has been added or changed in this edition of the standards. The focus on protection leadership, I think, resonates a lot with a lot of what we are facing right now, and some of the questions around leadership on protection. So I think that's a chapter that I would encourage colleagues to read through. And then the chapter on digital risk, it was mentioned, we will do a specific webinar and session with you on that, because it's a very important topic that we also want to have the time to unpack. So we will be sharing shortly an invitation for a webinar specifically on digital risk and protection. So maybe just to close, we will have the recording of the session and all the material that was shared today on the GPC website. Don't hesitate to look at the website for those material. If you have any questions, we are happy to also channel them to the colleagues from the ICRC. And Conrad and Maria Carolina, thank you again so much for being with us today and for launching this series of webinar. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your
Bye.
Thank you, colleague. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.